All right, let's see. Talking about measuring battery voltage, we had the two different measurements, the open circuit voltage, which will lie to you, and the closed circuit voltage. Did you want to keep the lights off? Makes me sleepy. Closed circuit voltage, CCV. All right, so that is obviously measured with load applied. I have always, but let's never say always. Usually less. Depends on the load. If it's a big load, it's way more. Always less than OCV. So you gotta be careful, because if you just hook up a little tiny LED or something, then well, you're probably not going to notice it. Hook up a incandescent landing light or a starter, then yeah, it's going to be a lot less than the open circuit. So will decrease with an increase in load. So in other words, the more load you add to the battery, the lower the voltage is going to be of the battery until you take the load off. And then I said there was a third one. What the hell is it? I don't remember what I was going to say. Oh! Why this one? While charging. Voltage while charging. CHARG, charging. All right, so I wanted to bring this up because you have to be aware of the fact that a battery in an aircraft, car, vehicle is the primary source of electrons to get it started and run things until the engine is running, the alternator generator is running. Then once the alternator generator is online, then that's the primary source, and the battery becomes a load. And so it's going to constantly be putting current into the battery. And the amount of current that goes in the battery, as we're going to find out, is going to be dependent upon the state of the battery. Because the voltage is going to be set. It's going to be a set voltage, so that'll be the constant potential charging method. And as the battery tops off, the amount of current going into it's going to be less. So, you know, it's typical when you start your aircraft, you have an ammeter on it, you're going to see the ammeter deflect over to 10, 15 amps, and you'll slowly start watching it work its way back towards zero. It'll never be on zero. It's usually about a needle's width away from zero. And what you're seeing is that you use the battery to start the aircraft, which took a draw on the battery, and now the alternator's charging the battery, and then the battery's taking a bunch of amps, and as the battery's happy and satisfied, then the alternator's only putting out just a little bit of amperage to maintain the load and charge the battery. Also needs to be said that, especially for those of you who are now working on NiCads, a lot of you tell me that the voltage of a NiCad is about 1.55 volts per cell. Well, it's not. It's about 1.2 volts per cell. So where does 1.5 volts come in? Well, if you read the charging instructions, it's telling you to charge the battery at a constant current. So you tell the machine how much current is going to go into the battery. So if I tell that machine that you've now seen, I want to put 4 amps into this battery, well, it's going to adjust the voltage to provide that. And at some point, it's going to the battery will get to 1.55 volts, because that's how many volts it takes to put amperage in it, and that's when the battery is finished. It's while it's on the charger. You take it off the charger, you're not going to have 1.55 volts on a NiCad cell. You have a lot less than that, about 1.2, 1.3, somewhere in that neighborhood. The 1.55 is voltage while on a charger.
Okay, because your charger has to be able to push more voltage than the battery can actually receive. So that's how to charge it, right? So once you've disconnected it from the charger, you're no longer at 1.55.
Goes back down.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
So everybody got that? Because a lot of you are putting 1.55. I'm like, where'd you get the 1.55? It says right there, measure it, 1.55. I'm like, it does say measure 1.55. Are you going to have your battery on a charger while you're trying to discharge it? That's where you say no. All right. All right. So I want to talk about internal resistance. This is kind of a funny thing, internal resistance. And it's something that we have a project to determine the internal resistance of the battery. And I have yet to see a practical application for this other than the fact to reinforce Ohm's law to you one more time in another direction, so that by the time you leave here, you are very, very good at Ohm's law and figuring things out. And so if nothing else, it does that. But if you're not careful, the whole concept of internal resistance can kind of screw you up with how battery works. So we'll go with this. We'll see where we go. So IR, internal resistance, look at that. We're saving time. We'll see world. Is the resistance of the battery when connected to a load. All right, so I think that right there is kind of a key word. Connected to a load. Not a charger, but a load. So internal resistance equals the open circuit voltage minus the closed circuit voltage, because open circuit is bigger, divided by amps. We'll say load amps. And if you've never noticed this before, there's this thing called Ohm's law where E equals IR. And I know, it's my fault if you don't know that. And if we look at that right there, it is I equals what? I equals E divided by, and I just wrote that. Almost. Yeah, nope. I didn't write that. What I did write was, yeah, I don't know what the hell I wrote. R, because there's an I there, and it's from R, resistance equals the E divided by the I, which is exactly what that is, even though it starts with an I. It's R. So it's just another way of looking at it. All right. So we had an example. We measured a battery. We walk up to the battery with no load. We take a voltmeter. We put it across there. We go, well, look at that. We got 14 volts. So open circuit voltage equals 14 volts. And then I take some sort of load that draws 100 amps, whatever it may be. We'll just keep it simple. I won't make you do like, oh, it's a 100-watt light bulb and figure it out. We have a closed circuit voltage. So I take this 100-watt load, or 100 amp load, and I connect it to the battery. Nice big cables, and there it is, and it's running. And I take my voltmeter and I do another check on it, and while that 100 amps is running, I check it and I go, wow, that's 12 volts now. Is the battery dying? Slowly, but that's not the problem. It's just a big load, so it dropped the voltage down. And I said the load equals 100 amps. So what is my internal resistance? So that's 14 minus 12 divided by 100. So that's 2 divided by 100. So that equals 0.2? 0.02. 0.02 ohms. All right, what does that tell you? Tells you the internal resistance is 0.02 ohms. That's all I can tell you about that. Like I said, I don't know a practical application for that. I'm sure there is one if you're an electrical engineer. I am not. But what happens as the battery moves to a discharge state? So example, as battery moves to discharge state. Same experiment. We have the open circuit voltage equals 14 because open circuit voltage will lie to you. Closed circuit voltage now equals 10 because the battery is wearing out. The load is still 100. So the internal resistance equals 0.04. So at 0.04. So as the battery discharged, as battery discharges, the IR will what? Increase. Well, this becomes a real problem because this internal resistance thing is a fun little thing to do in the lab, but like I said, it's never come into practice for me out in the field. Here's what does come into the practice in the field. If I take a charger and I set my charger for constant potential, which means constant what? Voltage. So I set the voltage. Does the voltage change on the charger? What does change? The current will fluctuate. So I take my charger, I put it at 14 volts. Let me put this, not to be confused with charging resistance, we'll call it that. I kind of made that up. All right, because we have, let's say we have a dead battery, or nearly dead. Or let me think. Do we do a chart of some sort? Yeah, we do a chart. Let me see, what would my chart look like? And we'll let this be the amps. This will be high amps. This will be low. And this will be state of charge. State of charge. So as I start to charge a battery with constant potential, so constant potential, say I set it for 14.2 volts, and the battery is pretty dead, so dead, and this is charged. Am I going to have a high current flow or low current flow? I mean, really high. I just told you, when I start the aircraft and I've used up some of the battery and the alternator, which is constant potential, what do I see on the ammeter? I see this big deflection. The batteries, I see my alternators putting out 10, 15 amps. Where's all that amps going to? This is kind of a interactive thing. Yeah, my drunk guy over here, he's not drunk, hungover, there's a difference. He's with me over here. All right, so I'm going to have this dead, so I'm going to have this really high rate going into my battery. Then, as the battery gets charged, my amps are going to work its way down until there's hardly any amps. So when I charge a dead battery, what would you say the resistance is going into it? High or low? Low. I would too. The resistance is low because all the current is going in there. So if I had to make up something, I would say, well, if I connect my 14 volts to a dead battery and a lot of current goes in, then the resistance inside must be really low. Yeah. Oh, the internal resistance must be really low of a dead battery. I would say that. Then I would say, wow, as it charges up and it gets near the very top, and I'm still putting in 14 volts, I look at it and go, only half an amp going in there. Well, then the resistance of a charged battery must be really high. But what did we just say over here with this internal resistance crap?
That it increases.
Then it's the backwards thing. But remember, I also said when it's connected to a load. So that's why I say that I want to be careful with this, because even though we're going to calculate and work with this internal resistance, as somebody who's working on airplanes and dealing with batteries, I don't think you'll ever work with this internal resistance open circuit divided by closed circuit divided by amps. But you will think a lot about the fact that a dead battery draws a lot of current and a full battery draws very little current. And if you don't keep that straight in your head, you're going to screw something up. So that's the thing you want to remember. But at the same time, you have to learn about the internal resistance thing. I think that made sense. It made sense to me. How'd it work for you?
Yeah, it made sense.
I got one guy. All right. Who said that? No. Ah, good. All right, my guy. All right. Any questions about that?
No.
You're just so lost. You don't even know. I thought about this on my ride home on Friday, because you guys, I felt bad because I'm like, you guys are like the worst as far as giving me feedback, and that's fine. And I realized why, because you're all first semester, and this is the first time I've ever done that. There's only a few of you who are second semester, and those of you in second semester are pretty quiet people. Tony, I don't know what your thing is. I mean, you're just tired, I guess, now. But normally it's half and half, and so half the class has already been with me for half a year, and they're like obnoxious. So you guys will all be so loud and obnoxious by, I don't know.
You have
Huh?
Can you give like an example of like where you might be troubleshooting, or you might be putting in a battery that you didn't know was on its way out? Can you paint a picture as to what that might look like if you didn't fully understand that a battery that's dead is going to have more resistance? Like how would that trip you up in the field? Like where would you see that being an issue?
It's not so much the whole resistance thing. Well, you mean with the IR, the open circuit minus closed circuit, the true IR? Never. It's never occurred to me. It's not something that would come into my mind, and I don't think there's any application for it whatsoever. But to flip it in this chart, that is something that you'd be surprised some people just don't understand. You know, they might, as simple as a customer going, look, I got some sort of electrical problem. What's your electrical problem? Ah, man, I think I got a short. Because every time I start the airplane, the amps goes way over here, and then, you know, I look at it a few minutes later, it's over. So there's a short when I start it, but then it kind of goes away. Like, no, that's what a battery does, you know, or even just charging it, just standard charging things. You know, you're trying to charge a battery, especially if you have somewhat of a manually controlled charger, and you're not thinking it through, and you're like, well, shoot, you know, I can't get any more than a couple amps out of it, and, you know, and I've got 30 volts going into it. I don't know what the hell's wrong with it. You know, it must be a bad battery. No, it must be full. Yeah.
Is it kind of like the same concept as like refilling a glass? Like say like
No.
Your glass is kind of like water, right? You kind of like you have a heavier pour going in, so you're trying to put like more amps into the battery because like, it's depleted. You have nothing in there, so you're trying to refill it.
But it does it on its own.
Okay.
Well, I was kind of thinking the same thing, but if you had a hose that you're filling from the bottom,
Okay.
right, and voltage is pressure, right?
There you go.
It's going to fill up pretty quick, but then the tank
Yep.
gets full, so there's you kind of like equalizing the pressure.
It's a really good analogy.
The hose isn't going to do as much.
So you're saying like a tank that was like 50 feet tall, and you're filling it from your or you know those above ground pools. You know, like if you fill it from the bottom, at first, man, the hose is going to be coming out like crazy. But as the water pressure builds up, it's got to fight. So, you know, it's 100 gallons per hour this way. And then by the time the pool starts to get full, then it's only like 20 or 30 gallons per hour. And so, yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, so the closer the power rate, the power levels actually come to equalizing, you're going to get less amperage going into it.
Yeah.
Inside.
Yeah.
Isn't that a function of the voltage regulator?
No, not at all. The voltage regulator sets the voltage to set voltage all the time. So if the battery is dead and it wants to collect 20 amps and you have a 20 amp alternator, you're going to put out 20 amps at 14.5 volts. And then when the battery is fully charged, it's 14.5 volts, but less amps going out to the battery. So your voltage regulator's job is to keep the voltage set exactly all the time at that voltage. And the amps are going to do what they want to do.
Electricity.
Oh, the fun.
Dead batteries have low resistance and charged batteries have high resistance.
I want to be careful how I say that because right up here I just said that the internal resistance by formula is proven to be the opposite. That a battery, as it moved towards a discharge state, we just did this, so it had 0.02 when it was, in our example, when it was fully charged, and then when it was not fully charged, we said, oh, well, look at that. The internal resistance doubled. by formula, by IR formula. But then I turned it all around and said, it's the opposite when you're charging.
When charging.
Yes. So I guess we could call it charging resistance versus internal resistance. So the charging resistance is very low when it's dead. Yeah.
So you brought up that you've never come across a practical application for internal resistance. Why don't you just skip that and teach the charging resistance? Then there's not the confusion.
Because it's in the
Just
Yeah.
FAA needs you to know it.
Practical standards, practical test standards. Plus I wouldn't know how to do it. And then I couldn't screw with you with Ohm's law and how to work a shunt and
Yeah, I mean, I see how you run out of ways.
yeah. Yeah, I couldn't ask you how to measure amperage
No,
without an ammeter, stuff like that.
no.
All right, where am I going with
Leave that
here?
covered.
All right, let's talk specific about some lead acid battery stuff here. 8, lead acid batteries. Oh, lead. Lead acid batteries. All right. AKA, what's that mean? Also known as storage battery. Also known as, is it a primary or secondary cell?
Secondary.
Because you got to charge it to use it. So I'm going to say there are two types of lead acid battery. What the hell did I just write? AC acid battery or batteries in aviation. One, there's the vented cell. Well, that's your old school battery right here. Where you got the caps on the top. How many caps are there? 6 or 12. 6 or 12. So you double it. So if it's got 6, then it's a 12-volt battery. If it's got 12, then it's 24-volt batteries. So 24-volt batteries are very common in aviation. All right, so it's just got vented caps. These are the vented caps. Right here. They're kind of fun. This one is not
There's a little
broken.
weight in there.
And this one is broken. So there's a lead weight in there. And the way it works is, if you see, look at this little thing, when you tip it to the side, it sucks it up and blocks it. So, you know, if you're upside down or something, the acid doesn't run out. So, but then this one I took the top off, so you can just see, oh, it's just a cone.
Sounds like good. Check that out.
Oh. By the time you hear the sound, I live in Stockton. I'm used to that. All right, vented cells. It's similar to, you know, I don't want to say car battery, but screwable caps allow access to top of cells for servicing. So vented cell. Let's see. Screwable caps allow access to top of cells for servicing. And then the other type is the what we could call a sealed battery. There's a couple different types. No ports for servicing. Unless you try. If you try hard enough, they're there. The big advantage, no acid spills. I guess they have fireworks or something.
Blow a tire, huh?
The hobos
What are they fighting with? Little howitzers?
They're creative.
What do I want to say about this? There's a lot to say about this. There's so much more about batteries, I think, than the notes gives. All right, so talk about my plane, because my plane, number one, I love my plane, but it's such a great learning thing about batteries because of the fact that my battery is all the way in the back, and so it's problematic.
Hey, can I touch this or?
Can you,
It
I'm not sure what you're talking about, so
Lick it.
it's lead.
It's lead.
Lead is good for you. It's one of the essential minerals.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, if it was good enough for the Greeks, it's good enough for us.
Don't you take like men's one a day with lead?
No.
Just ask the Brahmins.
Okay, so when you're talking about, so if you're just joining us, there's people shooting each other. Okay, so flooded batteries. One of the things about flooded batteries is they're supposed to be vented. And if you look up 4313, there's some stuff in there. I know there's some stuff in the FAR somewhere, but 4313, I think actually in section, the section of batteries, obviously. And it does talk about how you're supposed to vent and have positive ventilation of batteries, especially if they're in the compartment with people, because while the battery charges, it gives off hydrogen gas. And if you're not familiar with hydrogen gas,
Here's a video.
Hydrogen gas will explode. Remember the Hindenburg?
That wasn't
You don't remember?
Oh, the humanity. Okay, so the Hindenburg was filled with hydrogen, as you probably guess. So hydrogen is rather explosive, although they don't think it was so much the hydrogen, it was the aluminum dope. But anyway, another story. So hydrogen will explode. So one of the first shops I worked at, mind you, the shop was there pre-World War II. And so it was a very old wooden, just like you'd imagine structure, with a big bow on it, and well, it had burned down before I got there. I don't know, 40 years or 50 years before I got there. Might as well tell you that story. It's a very creepy story because I got it firsthand from a guy who was there, and they were working on a Stearman biplane, and they were doing something, and I don't know. So Eddie, the owner of the shop, he went out there to deal with this guy in the Stearman, and he turned around and he yelled at something, or the guy had taken off, and he yelled something to the people in the shop, and everybody said, "What the hell did Eddie just say?" And I don't know what the hell Eddie said. So every single one of them, for unknown reason, walked out to ask what the hell Eddie just said. And as they're all standing outside of the shop, the guy in the Stearman went inverted and went right into the hangar and blew up the hangar, killed him, and everybody who worked there survived. So they rebuilt the hangar. This is where I worked, and there was a big crater right in the middle of the floor, and nobody had ever fixed it because that's where the oxyacetylene was. So it was a great story. It's like, what's the big crater? Well, that's where the oxyacetylene blew up when the Stearman hit the hangar. It's like, geez, okay. So, and when they rebuilt the hangar, I think they did it in one day, and they used, so,
Did they use orange?
yeah. The exterior was interior grade sheetrock in many places with stucco over it. So it was like really, but anyway, in the paint room was a battery charger. So in the room with the explosive stuff was the battery charger. And as one guy would do, you're seeing me charge my battery in accordance with the instructions in airworthiness and do a nice measured discharge. Well, we'd get these people in and say, my battery's dead. The airplane wouldn't start. And this guy like, I'll fix it. And he would take it, and he would put it in the paint room, and he would take this old, war surplus thing, had big dials on it, and turn it up, and he would plug this battery in and just crank it. and you could smell the hydrogen. You walk in the room, it's like, oh my God, it's terrible. And it's just spewing, and there's a wet spot around the battery like this from the acid just bubbling out. And it's like, what are you doing, man? Oh, I'm just blowing off the sulfate, which does work. But the whole room just, in this old machine, you could look in it and see things glowing in it and stuff. You're like, God, this is not going to, and I wish you could see what I could see in my head. And then, just to make things worse, we did dope and fabric work in this paint room. So a lot of dope and fabric, which is flammable too. But somebody had taken 1x4s. So you take 1x4s, you take like an 8-foot section, and another 8-foot section, and then connect it with a 4-foot section, so 8x4x8. And they took porcelain, screw-in light bulb fixtures with Romex, going to each one, and off that hung these light bulb heat lamps to heat the thing. So when you do dope and fabric, and so the guy would always hang his gun on it. So he'd hang the gun on the Romex. When it stretched, it would spark out at like one socket. That light would go out, and we'd pull up the paint gun, and spark again, and that would work again. I'm like, so with the thing in the corner, and the fact that it never blew up is hilarious. But I'm like, wow, okay, yeah. So, yeah, it's the way we've always done it, Really? You've never had an accident here? Yeah. Well, there was the time when that one wing caught fire, sparks flew, and the whole thing went up in flames, but, we got it out. Okay. That's, I tell you that story to tell you, so when you had the battery there and the hydrogen and how do you disconnect something like that? Well, if you walk up to it and disconnect it from right here, you're dead. It will explode. You had to go over to the wall or to the circuit breaker and shut it off and get an explosion-proof fan and blow out the hydrogen before you did anything. I know.
You could just inhale and run outside and exhale.
Yeah, that's how that works.
Yeah.
Because it has oxygen with it too, right?
Yeah. I think maybe you're thinking of helium. Yeah, then it made your voice all funny, right?
A little bit deeper.
All right. So the point I'm making is, right, so batteries have this significant problem, especially, and it's vented, right? These caps are vented to the atmosphere. And even in an aircraft that's operating normally, you have to have some sort of vent that goes from a battery box. So mine is it's in the aircraft, it's in the tail, but the only thing separating me from that battery is just a piece of plastic finish that goes there. And so, this little vent pipe that comes out of the bottom of the battery box, and that vent pipe goes, about yay far underneath the airplane. And so when acid drips out of there, it drips down the airplane and it ruins the paint on the aircraft. So, I don't want that. So I don't want that battery. So the next one I get is going to be one of the sealed ones where it doesn't do that. So things are much better now. All right, so let me see. Batteries, sealed battery, no acid spills. I went through all that to say about no acid spills, but I bet you won't forget that story. All right, ratings. A, B, C. Okay, good. D right here. D, ratings. Ratings. All right. Common aircraft batteries. Common aircraft battery voltage ratings are, you've got the 12 volt. Now when I say 12 volt, that is the nominal voltage. It's not the voltage, it's just we say nominal, because it's not going to measure 12 volts. So which has 6 cells connected
In series.
Thank you. In series. It should have about 12.6 of an OCV, open circuit voltage, which puts it at 2.1 volts per cell. By the way, reverse that to 1.2 volts. per cell for NiCad, which is kind of cool. We just reverse it, but remember to reverse it. But more voltage per cell per
Is
letter.
that for all of NiCad?
Hmm. The cells, yeah. Because of their chemical makeup, that's what they do. And the chemical makeup of that is going to give it 2.1 volts. But the amps are very different depending on the plate size. So, and we have the 24 volt, which is 12 cells in series. Should give an open circuit voltage of about 25.2. Open circuit voltage. And then batteries are then rated in amp hours. And we talked about that, where 1 amp hour is the ability of a battery to deliver 1 amp for 1 hour. So 1 amp hour is the ability of a battery to deliver 1 amp for 1 hour. Or half amp for 2 hours. So on and so forth. All right, got to bid you